Plenty of countries discovered oil in the 20th century. Very few turned it into permanent power. Even fewer turned it into a dynasty that could survive wars, recessions, revolutions, and global scrutiny, while growing richer, more insulated, and more indispensable with each decade. Oil didn't make the House of Saud powerful. It made them untouchable, and that distinction explains almost everything that followed. Welcome to the Financial Historian Files, where money, power, and history collide. And nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand how the House of Saud rose to power, you have to forget the modern image of Saudi Arabia for a moment. No skyscrapers, no oil wealth, no global influence. In the early 20th century, the Arabian Peninsula was poor, fragmented, and strategically peripheral. Power didn't flow from institutions. It flowed from tribes, land control, and personal loyalty. The Saud family was one of many regional players. Ambitious? Yes, but hardly inevitable rulers of a future energy superpower. Their rise began not with oil, but with consolidation. In 1902, a young leader named Abdulaziz ibn Saud launched a campaign to reclaim territory his family had lost. Over the next 3 decades, he combined military conquest, religious alliance, and strategic marriages to unify large parts of the peninsula. This wasn't nationalism in the Western sense. There was no constitution, no representative assembly, no idea of citizenship as participation. Power was personal, centralized, and dynastic from the start. This is the first crucial difference most Western audiences miss. In Europe and North America, modern states emerged through conflict between rulers and taxpayers. Kings needed money. To get it, they had to negotiate. Parliaments formed, legal limits appeared, and rights were extracted in exchange for revenue. Over centuries, this created the idea that the state exists because citizens fund it. Accountability followed the money. The House of Saud never went through that process. When oil was discovered in the 1930s, it didn't just change the Saudi economy, it short-circuited political development entirely. Revenue no longer depended on citizens. It flowed from the ground, extracted by foreign companies, paid directly to the ruling structure. The state didn't need to tax its population to survive. And when a government doesn't need your money, it doesn't need your consent. This is the second difference, and it's decisive. In Western systems, taxation creates friction. Citizens complain, they demand services, they vote, governments fall. In Saudi Arabia, oil revenue removed that pressure. The ruling family became the distributor of wealth rather than its collector. Instead of negotiating with society, it subsidized it. Jobs, housing, fuel, healthcare, these weren't rights earned through participation. They were benefits granted through loyalty. This is what economists call a rentier system, but you don't need the jargon to understand the logic. Imagine a household that doesn't earn money from work, but from owning a toll booth on the only road everyone must use. That household doesn't need to please anyone inside the house. Everyone else needs them. Oil turned the House of Saud into that household at a national scale. By the mid-20th century, the family had something most rulers in history never achieved: revenue without representation. That allowed them to build a state that looked modern on the surface, ministries, budgets, infrastructure, but operated on fundamentally different incentives. Stability didn't depend on legitimacy. It depended on distribution. As long as oil money flowed, loyalty could be maintained. And oil didn't just flow, it surged. After World War II, global industrial growth exploded. Cars, planes, factories, electricity, all of it ran on petroleum. Saudi Arabia sat on some of the largest, cheapest to extract reserves on Earth. That made the kingdom indispensable, not powerful in a traditional military sense, but structurally unavoidable. You could ignore Saudi politics. You couldn't ignore Saudi supply. This is where the story becomes global. Unlike Western democracies, which are constrained by voters and fiscal limits, the House of Saud operated with long time horizons. Decisions weren't filtered through elections every 4 years. They were filtered through dynastic survival. The goal wasn't popularity, it was permanence. That shaped everything. Oil revenues were recycled into alliances, arms purchases, and financial assets abroad. The family didn't just accumulate wealth, it converted it into insulation. Strategic relationships with major powers ensured external protection. Massive reserves ensured internal stability. And because the ruling structure controlled both the money and the security apparatus, there was no meaningful internal challenger. Compare that to Western political elites. Presidents and prime ministers rotate, parties rise and fall. Wealth is fragmented, power is temporary. Even billionaires operate within legal systems they don't fully control. Dynasties in the West struggle to last beyond a generation or two. The House of Saud was built to last indefinitely. This is the third difference, and perhaps the most uncomfortable one. Westerners are taught to think of wealth as something earned in markets. Companies succeed, individuals rise, failure is possible. In Saudi Arabia, wealth at the top is not primarily entrepreneurial, it is structural. It flows from ownership of a national resource and control of the state itself. The family doesn't compete, it allocates. That doesn't make the system irrational, it makes it resilient. When oil prices rise, revenue surges. When prices fall, reserves cushion the shock. When social pressure builds, spending increases. When global politics shift, alliances adjust. The dynasty survives not because it guesses the future correctly, but because it doesn't rely on a single source of legitimacy. Here's the irony. Many Western observers assume systems like this are fragile, that they'll collapse under pressure. But history suggests the opposite. Systems that don't need public buy-in are often more durable in crisis, not less. They can act quickly, they can suppress dissent, they can absorb shocks without asking permission. The system the House of Saud built didn't stop at national borders. It couldn't. Oil only becomes real power when it's embedded into global systems: finance, trade, security, and currency. And that's exactly what happened next. By the 1970s, oil was no longer just an energy source. It was the backbone of the global economy. Transportation, manufacturing, food production, logistics, everything depended on it. When supply tightened, prices didn't just rise, they transmitted stress across the entire system. Inflation followed, growth slowed, and political pressure exploded. Suddenly, countries that had never thought much about Saudi Arabia found themselves watching it very closely. This was the moment oil revealed its true nature, not as a commodity, but as a bottleneck. The House of Saud didn't need to dominate militarily. Control over supply was enough. When oil flows freely, the global economy breathes. When it doesn't, everything tightens. Central banks scramble, governments panic, and consumers feel it at the pump, in grocery prices, and eventually in interest rates. The distance between an oil field in the desert and a household budget in Europe or the United States turns out to be much shorter than people expect. This is where the petrodollar system enters the picture, quietly but decisively. As oil sales exploded, so did dollar revenues. Those dollars didn't sit idle. They were recycled into Western financial markets. Government bonds, banks, real estate, equities. This created a loop. Oil exporting states accumulated dollars. Those dollars flowed back into the financial systems of oil importing countries. Debt was financed, markets were stabilized, and the dollar's global role was reinforced. The House of Saud became a pillar of the global monetary order. This matters because it explains why Saudi Arabia was never treated like a normal country. It wasn't simply a supplier, it was a stabilizer. Its cooperation helped keep energy markets predictable and financial markets liquid. That gave the dynasty leverage far beyond its population size or formal institutions. Influence came not from ideology, but from integration, and integration creates mutual dependence. Western governments needed energy security, financial systems needed capital recycling, Saudi Arabia needed protection and market access. The result wasn't domination by one side, but entanglement. Criticism became selective, pressure became calibrated, and the relationship was managed, not resolved. Here's where the contrast with Western political systems becomes sharp again. In democracies, economic pain translates quickly into political consequences. Inflation erodes trust, energy price spikes fuel, voter anger, and leaders are blamed even when causes are global. Policy becomes reactive. Short-term fixes are favored over long-term planning because elections impose deadlines. The House of Saud operates under no such constraints. When prices rise, it benefits fiscally. When prices fall, it adjusts output. When social pressure increases, it spends more. When global politics shift, it waits. Its timeline is generational, not electoral. That difference alone explains why the dynasty has survived shocks that would destroy most Western governments. This isn't about competence versus incompetence. It's about incentives. Western leaders are forced to manage optics. The Saudi system manages flows. Western states explain themselves to citizens. The Saudi state distributes resources to maintain equilibrium. One system trades accountability for instability. The other trades accountability for durability. Neither is morally pure, but one is structurally harder to dislodge. This brings us to the present and why this story still matters. Energy shocks haven't disappeared. They've just changed shape. Supply chains remain fragile. Inflation has returned in ways many economists declared impossible a decade ago. And once again, oil and energy sit at the center of the storm. When prices move, everything else follows. Wages, interest rates, housing costs, political sentiment. You don't need to support the House of Saud to be affected by it. You're already in the system. What often goes unspoken is how insulated the dynasty is from the consequences others face. Rising prices that strain households can strengthen state revenues. Currency instability that punishes savers barely registers against vast reserves. Global volatility that destabilizes elected governments often leaves dynastic systems intact. That's not because they're immune to reality, it's because they're positioned upstream from it. This is the core lesson of the House of Saud and of the billionaire order more broadly. Modern power isn't just about wealth, it's about placement within the system. Control the choke points, control the flows, control the timelines. Everything else becomes manageable. The dynasty understood something many Western societies still struggle with: Legitimacy is optional if dependency is high enough. Oil created that dependency, not just once, but continuously. Every day the global economy wakes up needing energy, the system reaffirms itself. And every attempt to move away from oil takes decades, not years. That gives those who control it time, the most underrated asset in power. The uncomfortable truth is this. The House of Saud didn't exploit the system. It mastered it, and that mastery reveals something broader about the world we live in. The elites who endure aren't always the most innovative or the most visible. They're the ones who position themselves where everyone else has no choice but to pass through. History doesn't repeat, but if you don't understand it, it'll crush you all the same. The House of Saud shows us that modern dynasties aren't built on popularity or progress. They're built on leverage, and leverage, once established, is very hard to vote away. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, and I'll show you where to look.